In order to successfully complete this tutorial, you will need a hardcover book to measure and a measuring tool. I'm using my architectural scale and this old copy of Being in Time by Martin Heidegger. There are many ways to approach any problem, and 3D modeling is no different. With time, you will each develop competency with certain tools, and likely with a small palette of operations, you will be able to create very interesting and complex models. The first model we're going to work on today will not be one of those such models. This is not going to be a complicated problem. Have your hardcover book handy, and feel free to pause the video often so that you can take measurements and build a model of your book, not just copy the book that I'm about to model. Let's go through 3 different ways that you could model the cover of the book. We'll start with easy and work our way up to more complex. First, open a new Rhino document and select Small Object, Inches, unless you'd prefer to use metric, which is fine with me. Let's say Open. Make sure that your Properties and your Layers dialog boxes are open, and to open those, if you recall, you would click this patriotic cake for layers and the rainbow wheel for properties. We want to go ahead and create a couple of layers for us to work on, so I'd like you to rename one of these layers to Cover and one of the layers to Pages for the 2 main components of the book. So we do that by a slow double click, and then you can type. A slow double click. And then I want to set Cover to be the default layer by either checking the check mark, by double-clicking the name quickly, a fast double-click, or by right-mouse clicking and saying Set Current. And even though I went on and on about how the colors don't matter, I'm going to go ahead and set my colors by clicking on the color icon. I'd like the cover to be dark blue. I'd like the pages to be light yellow. Okay, so I'm ready to go. Cover is set current. Let's start by working in the top view. So I'm going to double click on the word top to enlarge the top view. We want to use the Polyline tool to draw the profile of the book cover, as if the book was sitting upright, the way that books sit on a shelf, and I'm looking down at the top of the book. I've already measured my book, so I'm going to type in those precise dimensions, and I'll show you how to do that. So let's go ahead and get the Polyline tool here, or you can start typing Polyline. I'm just going to go ahead and pick a point anywhere on my screen. It doesn't really matter, so I'm going to start here. Now you want to move your mouse in the direction that you want the line to go. And just because I've already turned some things on, I'm going to turn all of these off so that it might operate the way that your screen is operating right now. You probably have your line, you can move your cursor freely in any direction, but we'd like to turn on what's called orthographic mode, which constrains our cursor to only move 0 degrees, 90 degrees, and on the 45s. So let's go ahead and turn ortho on by clicking here. You just click on that. I believe on the Mac beta version, those buttons are up here in the top left corner. If we look up at the command prompt, you can see that it's asking us for the next point of the polyline. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and type in the length of this line. So my book happens to be 5 7/8 inches in this direction. So I'm going to type 5 hyphen 7/8 and then the inches symbol, which is the quotation marks symbol. So 5 7/8 inches. And hit enter. And now I can still actually set the direction for that line, but notice that the length is frozen at 5 7/8 inches. So once I type it in, I hit enter, and then I need to click with my mouse in the direction to set the direction. So I click in this anywhere in that direction, and now I'm ready to make the next segment of my line. The spine of the book is 1 5/8 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and type in 1 hyphen 5/8 as a fraction, and then the inches sign, and hit enter. And now you'll see that my length has been set, but I need to tell Rhino what the direction is. So I move my mouse into the right direction and click once with the mouse button. Now I want to come back and draw the final edge of the cover of the book. But this time, instead of typing, as I'm sure you can imagine, typing the dimensions can get a little bit cumbersome. So as you get faster at using Rhino, you'll find all kinds of shortcuts. So this time, instead of typing, I'm going to use some of my helpers to set the length. So what I'm going to do is I want to move my mouse in the direction, and then I want to move my mouse down to the start point. And then as I move my mouse up, you'll see that I get this smart guide. And I can continue to move my mouse up. It locks into position so that it's perpendicular to the previous point that I created, and it's parallel to this starting point. And I just click with my mouse button, hit enter to finish the command, and that's exactly what I wanted to do. A precise polyline that is the exterior boundary of the cover of the book. Okay, great. Let's take a look at this in perspective. So I'm going to double click on top and then double click on perspective. I'm holding Shift and my right mouse button to pan to move this down towards the bottom of my screen. And what I would like to do is turn this two-dimensional curve into a three-dimensional surface. So to do that, I will use the Extrude command. And you can find Extrude under Surfaces by clicking and holding Surface. You can find it under your Surface menu. You can also find it under your Solids menu. For now, let's go ahead and use the Extrude that's under our Surface menu. So here, Extrude Straight. Click on that. Reading my command prompt, select the curves to extrude. Press enter when done. Set my extrusion distance. For both sides, I'm saying no. I only want to extrude it up. For cap, right now I don't need cap. For delete input, you can say yes. That would delete the original generating curve. If you have it set to no, that curve will remain in place. Okay, so let's go ahead and type our dimension. My book happens to be 8 5/8 inches tall, so I'm going to type in 8 5/8, hit enter, and the extrusion has been created. Like I showed you on the previous tutorial, I'd like to look at this in shaded mode. So let's do shaded with edges. And then I'd like to get rid of those ISO curves. Select the object, look in the properties window, and uncheck where it says visible. We're almost done with creating the easy version of the cover. The last thing we want to do, if I zoom in here, you'll see that our cover is infinitely thin, so we want to give the cover some thickness. So let's go ahead. This time we're going to type in a command, and the command is offset surface. So I just start typing offset, then I select offset surface, then I want to select the surface, read here, select the surface to offset, press enter. Again, looking at the command prompt, all of these arrows that you're seeing here, those are your surface normals, and the offset is going to happen in the direction of those normals. So if you wanted to offset towards the outside, you'd click flip all. If you'd like to offset towards the inside, flip them back. I happened to measure the outside of my book, so I actually want to create the thickness towards the inside. We do want it to be solid, so click on the word solid to select that option. We don't want it to be loose. Go ahead and leave your tolerance, and we don't want to go to both sides. And I measured my cover. My cover is 3/32 of an inch thick. Hit enter, and voila! We've just created our thickened cover. There you can see. The book cover now has thickness. Before we move on to the medium difficulty, let's look up close and see some of the problems. When you use that offset surface from this type of originating surface, we get some sloppy geometry, right? Here these two thickened surfaces are overlapping each other. We have things that are conflicting with each other. I don't really like that. So let's go ahead and try another way to create this surface. Let's go back to our top view. We're going to start by drawing the profile and extruding it, but this time we're going to actually draw both the inside and the outside surfaces and extrude the entire thing as one continuous piece of geometry. But before I do that, the same way that you sometimes use construction lines in analog drafting, we use construction lines in 3D modeling. So I want to make one more layer called construction lines, and I'm going to make them red. Okay, and I'd like you to first just make a regular line, not a polyline. So I'm going to type line, L-I-N-E. It doesn't matter where I put it, I'm just going to go ahead and click over in this general area. And I want to make this line 1 5/8 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and type in 1 5/8 inches, enter, click, and I'm done. Now I'd like to create another construction line that comes from the midpoint of that line over to about here. So let me go ahead and type line again. And this time what we want to do is we're going to use our object snaps so that it snaps right to the midpoint. You'll notice on my screen it is doing that. It's automatically selecting the midpoint. Your screen might not be doing that. So we want to turn your O snaps on. So you want to click this little area that says O snap, and you'll get a number of options. If you're on the Mac, again, I believe those options are up here in the upper left corner. So I want to make sure I have a check mark next to midpoint. So I want to select the midpoint and then just click an end point somewhere over in this area. If any of you are having the problem that when you go to make your lines, the line that you're making is off of the screen, just remember to use your middle mouse button to zoom in or out. What I would like to do is again get the polyline command. What I would like to do is to create a few more construction lines that'll help us to make the polyline that is the outside boundary of both the inside and the outside of that cover. So let's use the offset command. We used offset surface previously. This time we're just going to offset curves. The command is just offset. So the first thing I need is the thickness of the spine back here. So I would like to offset by 3/32. So I'm typing in that distance, hitting enter. Now I'm reading my command prompt, select curve to offset, side to offset. So I want to click on the side of that line where I want my new line to be created. If I click on this side and it's created the line, I want to do that again. If you hit return, it reactivates the previous command. This edge of the book, so that's 5 7/8, 5 7/8 inches. Select my curve to offset, click on the side where I would like the new line to be, and there we have it. We have all the construction lines that we need to create the new polyline. Okay, so what I'd like to do is only draw half of the book cover, right? It's symmetrical, so I don't want to do more work than I have to. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my Polyline tool. I want to make sure I'm on the cover layer. And I'm going to make sure to turn on your midpoint and your end point O snaps, your object snaps, and let's go ahead and start right here. So I just go up, click on that endpoint, come across, click on that endpoint. Now I want to come down by 3/32, so I'm going to type in 3/32. I made a mistake, so I can hit Control Z or Command Z to undo just one segment of that polyline. 3/32 inches. I don't think I put the inches symbol. Enter. Okay, then click to set the direction. I want to come back. Whoops. This time I want to intersect this construction line, so I want to turn on my perpendicular snap. There we go. Perpendicular. Come down and hit this midpoint and hit enter to complete the polyline. So I just created one polyline using those construction lines. With that new curve that I created selected, I want to mirror it so that I have it on the other side. So the command is mirror. I'm going to go ahead and type mirror. Because I learned in AutoCAD, I find that I tend to type my commands. I want to select this endpoint here, the start of the mirror plane, and I can move my mouse in either direction along this axis. Notice if I move it along a vertical axis, it says if the mirror runs vertical. If I run my mouse horizontally, I get the horizontal axis. Click to complete the command. If I want to select both halves of that, I click once, hold the Shift key to select the other one, and I want to combine these into one closed curve. So the command is really simple in Rhino. I just type join, and now it says two curves join into one closed curve. If you don't get that message, if you get a message that says it was unable to close the curve, that's because right here your endpoints are not meeting up perfectly, so I would go back and recreate your original polyline and try to use a lot of care in creating the polyline. I'm going to fly through the next steps because they're pretty much the same that we already did for the easy, so we're going to go to perspective view, select that new curve, use my extrude straight, set the height at 8 5/8, and hit enter. I did go a little bit fast, and you'll see here that I left this part so that it's as if the book cover is hollow. So let me go ahead and do a Control Z or Command Z on the Mac. Let me extrude straight one more time and show you that the step that I missed here, we talked about direction both sides, but cap. Cap is going to basically make this a solid. So I want to click yes for cap. I'm going to put that dimension in again, 8 5/8 inches, enter, and now you can see that we have a solid closed book. We don't have any messy geometry at our corners. Okay, so for those of you who think that there's a lot more detail to the book than what I'm capturing here, this last method is the one for you. Let's go ahead, let's go back to the top view. I want to make my construction lines layer active again. And actually, in order to speed things up, I want to use my same construction lines from the previous iteration. So let me go ahead and actually turn off temporarily, oops, sorry, I'm zooming in the wrong window. Let me temporarily turn off the cover layer by clicking on the light bulb. Then I want to draw a window and select all of my construction lines. And I want to copy, so the command COP, copy. And let me just move them down and hit enter to finish the copy. Turn my cover layer back on, and I'm ready to go. So what I'd like to capture this time is some of the subtlety of the spine. So you'll notice that there's a little dent in the side of the spine where the hard cover stops, and it's just the paper that wraps around the ends of the pages where the pages are glued into the binding. So in order to add that, I measured that it was about 3/16 of an inch. So I'd like to use my offset command, 3/16 of an inch from the inside edge of the binding. So I'm going to go ahead and offset this curve, 3/16 of an inch. I want to select the curve to offset the direction and click. And I'm going to use the arc command to create that little subtle indent. So the arc command is here. And if I click and hold, it expands, and then that menu flies out, so I can go ahead and pull that out. For a second, I'll close my surface menu. I want to select the 2-point arc. So the arc, the start, end, and the radius. Let me select the endpoint of one of these lines, the second endpoint, and now if I move my mouse in a perpendicular direction, you can see that I'm creating that curve. So it's a subtle curve. I'll go ahead and click and assume that that's the right curvature. And I notice that I made a mistake. I'd like to actually put this on the cover layer. So let me select that arc, right mouse click on cover, click Change Object Layer. It should now turn blue, great. And then I want cover to be my current layer. Okay, so let me go ahead and draw another portion of the cover. So I'm going to use my Polyline tool. From that point, I want to come to the end point, down 3/32 of an inch, so I'm going to type that dimension in, and then come back to the perpendicular point and hit enter. So this time I'm slowly building up this perimeter with just a little bit of line work at a time. I notice that the outside cover bulges just a tiny bit, so let's use the arc command one more time, using these 2 points, and then I want to move my mouse in a perpendicular direction to set that radius. If I want it to be even more subtle, let's say it looks about like that. Okay. And now I just need to connect these. But there's actually a subtle curve that connects between these 2 points. So let's start by drawing a line. Enter to finish that line. And I want to use a new command, that's the fillet command, to create a subtle curve between these 2 lines. F-I-L-L-E-T. Now let's set the radius to 1/16 of an inch. Select the first curve to fillet, so I want to select this curve, the straight line, the second curve, click there, and now we've got this subtle little curve between all of those portions. Notice if I try to click on something and there's a lot of geometry in that area, Rhino gives me a list of options. By moving your mouse through that list, you can see the different portions that you could select. So from the list, just click on the item that you'd like to select. I'm going to hold down my Shift key, select these other 3 portions of lines. I want to mirror from this midpoint. Click to finish the mirror. I want to fillet one more time with the same radius between this little straight line and that portion of line. Great. Okay, we're getting close. And then I want to join. Make sure to grab all the little bits of your lines. I'm holding the Shift command so that I can select all of these parts. I want to join this into one polyline, so the command I type join. And then I would like to offset to give that some thickness. And remember, this is just really paper, fabric, and some adhesive. The hardcover stopped back here, so it's a little bit thinner. If you look closely at your book, you'll notice that this portion of the binding is a little thinner than this portion. So I'm going to offset 1/16 of an inch, set my direction and click. And then I'd like to make this point right here line up with that point right there. So I'm going to select this curve. I want to turn my points on. All of these lines are made up of control points, so I want to turn my control points on so that I can move that control point to that location. So here's the control points button, or if you're using Windows version, it's F10. If you're using Mac, your function keys work in a little bit of a strange way. You would have to change a setting to be able to use your function keys, so you might want to just use the control points button. So let's turn our control points on. If I draw a window around this control point that highlights it, I can then click on that control point and drag it so that it snaps to this end point. If I think that that's a little weird looking, I can do the same thing by modifying this control point a little bit to try to get the geometry to not look so weird. And then let's go ahead and move over to the other side. Okay, let's say that looks good. Turn my control points off, or hit the escape key. And let's go ahead and join all of these lines. I'm holding the Shift key to select multiple. I want to join the whole thing. Make sure cap is turned on. Yes. 8 5/8 inches. There we go. Now you have a book cover with some more detail. This would be a good time to save your file. Let's create the pages. We're just going to create the pages as basically a simple box that fits within this cover. So we want to make our pages layer current. I want to hide these other two covers, not delete them, but just hide them. So if you select them and type hide, or you can hit this gray arrow to hide objects. Oops, I missed a piece. Hide those objects. Notice that the originating curves still exist. It's up to you if you want to keep them or not. I'm going to select them and delete them by, you can type delete or you can hit the delete key on your keyboard. So now those curves are gone. What I'd like to do is make a surface that fits perfectly in the edge of this part of the cover, and then I'm going to scale that surface and move it to give it a little bit of offset from the edges of the cover. So to make the surface, there are a number of options here in your surface command and your surface toolbar, and I think you can play with a few of them and just see if you can figure out how to make some of these surfaces work. For us, let's just use the surface from 3 or 4 corner points. Make sure your end point O snap is turned on, and I'm going to select the inside points, 4 points of the cover, and there we have our surface. My pages are actually offset 3/16 of an inch from the edge of the cover. So first thing I want to do is move this top edge and the bottom edge in by 3/16 of an inch. There are several ways to do this. You can play around with move, typing move, move edge, and then you can select that edge, follow the instructions and move it. But we can also use scale 1D, which you can scale 3D, which scales the entire object equally, scale 2D, where you scale in only the X and Y dimensions but not the Z, or scale 1D, where you're only scaling in one axis. In this case, we would only be scaling along the Z axis. In order to do that, though, I need a construction line. So I'm going to turn my construction line layer back on. I'm going to draw a line. It's just a construction line, so it doesn't really have to be very precise, but I want it to be along this edge. I want to move that line down 3/16 of an inch. So I'm going to type move. I do want to move vertically, right? I want to move along my Z axis. So I want to click on the word vertical or type V. So yes, vertical. And then I want to move it down 3/16 of an inch. So I actually need to type negative 3/16 inch, right? I want to move down along that vertical axis, so I have to type negative and hit enter. Okay, so now my construction line is in place. Let's type scale 1D. Enter that command. I'd like to select the surface and press enter. I'd like to make the origin point of my scale the center, right? I'm going to scale 1D, but I want to scale from the top and bottom equally, so the origin point should be the midpoint. And I could use this edge or this edge, it doesn't matter. Midpoint. My first reference point. Let's go ahead and pick the existing edge of the surface as my first reference point. The second reference point should be where that surface intersects my construction line. Click. And there we go. We scaled both the top and the bottom simultaneously. I'm done with that construction line, so I can hit delete. Great. Now let's go ahead and move. I want to move this surface towards the back spine by 3/16. So I'm going to again type move, select my surface. I'm going to press enter to finish selecting surfaces. Let's use this as my origin point, this edge. It's easy for me to find that point, it's easy to click on. So click there. I want to move my mouse in the direction that I'd like to move, type 3/16 of an inch, hit enter, and then a click, and now I've just moved that surface back 3/16 of an inch. So now we want to turn it into a three-dimensional volume. We'll use Extrude again, but the Extrude that we found here under generating surfaces, this Extrude really works best when you're extruding curves. So we would like to use the Extrude under solids. Extrude surface. So let's select that surface, press enter when done, extrusion distance. Let's just go ahead and make it something kind of arbitrary, but bigger than the book. Notice that I was using the wrong layer again, so I want to select that new extrusion, change it to my pages layer, select pages to be my current layer, and now I want to use my existing geometry to cut that piece of geometry. Instead of trying to model all of these subtle curves and get it to fit just perfectly in there, I'm just going to use the geometry I already created to cut this geometry. When you use one kind of geometry to cut another, especially when they're three-dimensional, those are called booleans. So let's go ahead and open right here where you see the two spheres kind of crashed into each other. Those are your booleans, or Rhino calls this your solid tools. We want to use the Boolean difference tool. Knowing which piece of geometry to select first and which one to select second takes some time to get used to, and I often do it wrong. So don't feel bad if you have to try a couple of times and then hit undo and try again. Since I practiced this, I think I remember that my first set I'd like to select the pages, press enter, select my second set of surfaces, I'd like to enter the book cover, press enter, and we should see that now the spine or the pages has been cut by the cover, so I can select on this separately and hit the delete key. And now the pages are fitting perfectly, including all the subtle curvature. Let me turn, oh, my surface is still there, my original surface, so let's delete that. Here's my new poly surface. I'm going to turn off my iso curves. And there we have it. We're done.